So I'm going to move on to the next question. Talking about for our athletes as we look forward now, what would be, sorry, not just athletes, performers, what would be the most important things that we need to look at? I don't know who wanted to jump first.
Yeah, I'm thinking about my athlete. It kind of depends on the athlete, because I don't know if you're going through this, Cinder, also, but they are all in such different places with, like, for example, I had one athlete that was training for the Olympics, and then that got postponed, and there aren't, in his sport, there aren't any performances coming up. There's no competitions coming up. So he had a couple of days where he's like, I didn't go to practice because I didn't have to. So for him, this struggle with motivation, and what, that's been really interesting to me, is people in some ways being asked to take a look at their relationship to their sport and maybe really evaluate, okay, if I don't have the carrot, right? If I don't have the competition that I'm training for, what meaning does this have for me, and what do I want to work on? And so I think that's been something that's been really interesting to watch people go through. And then for some of my other Olympic athletes, as soon as it happened, they were like, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened. I can let my body recover. I've always wanted to plant a garden. I'm going to plant, I never had time like this. So I'm going to plant a garden. I had 2 of my Olympic athletes plant gardens because they could, so I think just believing that there still are opportunities, right? So I talk about it. It's like you can move from obstacles to opportunities. So this feels like a big fat obstacle. However, where is the opportunity here? And I think the other thing that I really have been telling my athletes is really important is to stay fluid and deliberately take the time to adjust their goals. Because what happens is, when you have that original expectation of what your season was going to look like and what you wanted to accomplish this season or this year, and you don't do that deliberate act of actually writing down your new goal plan, your brain keeps holding on to that original expectation, and it keeps gauging your feelings of satisfaction and success based on that original expectation, which is no longer an option. It's no longer realistic, but you're still holding on to it in your mind's eye. So you got to make sure that, so that's something I'm working on with my athletes, is making sure that we're deliberately readjusting their goals, so that, what that does is it helps shift their energy and focus into something that they can control and feel good about and feel motivated about. So that's a big one for me right now with my clients.
I love that. Yeah, I love that point you mentioned about adjusting your goals. So there's someone I was working with where they didn't really do that mental shift, and they were still aiming for this promotion that was already on their target list. And they didn't change the fact that you're now homeschooling, you've got 3 kids at home, and basically they had a bit of a breakdown, and they couldn't let go of the fact that they weren't going to get that promotion and all that work. And it took a while. Unfortunately, it took for the breakdown to happen, for them to kind of realize, okay, I need to reprioritize what's the outflow coming out from my emotional world, and what can I actually deal with at the moment, and what's the biggest priority. So I love that point. Yeah, keep adjusting your goals, because everything keeps changing from day to day. So I really started to try not to look too forward past, if possible, a week, because if you try and look forward what's going to happen in November or December, you don't know what's going to change.
Yeah.
I thought I'd touch on that. Cinder, did you want to go next?
Sure. So I agree with everything Carrie said. I think about with the athletes I work with, it's like, okay, how can you focus on kind of this constant never-ending improvement, right? Why do you play? Connecting with that, but also it's like, how can I get better today? And I think the athletes who have that approach in a year from now, right, are going to be more fit, and they're going to be more ready and more confident in their game. So it's like, okay, what can I do today to get better? I also think when you ask that question, I think about the corporate clients that I have and the executives. And what I'm seeing right now is they are living in fear, many of them. And so when I think about that, I think about Daniel Goleman. He wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence. And he popularized this idea of that your amygdala can get hijacked. And what that means is, like, for those who are listening, it's like your amygdala is the small piece of your brain in the back where your fight or flight lives. And it's like, if you bring all your energy there and live there, then you continue to live in fear. Can you bring the energy back to the front part of your brain where you can really think through your prefrontal cortex, what's going on? And so I've been working with a lot of people on, like, I don't think that we should try to eliminate the fear, because I think fear keeps us safe. Fear kept my family safe when my son had COVID. And so I don't think we can eliminate it, nor should we. And I think people kind of want to eliminate it. Mm-hmm. And I think instead it's like, okay, realizing it's a future-based emotion, that you are maybe focused on what's going to happen in November instead of like, what can I do today? And it applies to all of us. So I think recognizing that, I think, is really helpful and important and empowering, to know that I, like what Carrie just said, is like, I can adjust and adapt, but I need to make sure that I'm not living in fear, because as a leader, if I'm living in fear, I can't be creative and connect with the people that I serve.
I love that answer. And I think, yeah, it's true. If you let the fear overtake you, it just can paralyze you. And I think we've all been so used to living with I call it our logical brain, where when we're always planning and structuring everything, you stay in that logical brain. But then now, where everything's been flipped over its head, you need to go to the creative brain. But that's quite hard to make that shift. Yes. And when you stay in that, I think that's what you meant, where your amygdala can hijack you, because you stay in that logical brain, you start calculating, this can happen, that can happen, that, and then the next minute you're down the rabbit hole and you can't find your way back up.
Yeah. Yeah. And you also, when that happens, you're not able to connect to the prefrontal cortex, what Cindra's talking about. You're not able to connect to the rational part of your brain, which is why we see people doing things like hoarding toilet paper, because it feels like, but this is something I can do. This is something in my control, and I'm taking action, and that alleviates anxiety. So I am going to go buy more toilet paper, right? But it's not a rational, but that's like you operating from that fear part of your brain.
And I think really tuning into this stretchy mindset where you allow yourself to be creative, and every day almost set, how am I going to be creative? What's something new I can do? Really helps with moving out of the fear and coming into that creativity part.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up, because I have been giving that as a homework assignment to a lot of my clients right now, of different fun, like interesting ways to make sure that they're engaging both parts of their brain, because so much of it we're in that sort of logical part of our brain, and having a hard time accessing that creative part. So that's really interesting to hear you bring that up too.
Yeah. It's something I've been trying to do, where I give myself a task of how can I call it pivoting. How can I do something different that I never did before? So I usually, and I actually got this from the mastermind, is if something really scares me, I kind of ask myself, why does it scare me? And then if I'm really passionate about something, then I force myself, okay, by the end of the week, you have to do something. And that helps me kind of come out of it. So I find that's been helpful. The other point I wanted to talk about was when you said being fluid, and how are you guys been moving and allowing yourselves to do that in the work that you do?
Yeah, I think for me, part of it is also making sure that I'm being fluid in my personal life, so that then I can also be fluid in my work life. Like making sure that, so much of it right now, like my mantra has been, really trying to extend more grace, both to myself as well as the people around me, because we're living at that, higher baseline of stress, to understand that, there are going to be times where someone might freak out about their oatmeal, and so making sure that we remind each other of that, of like, we're just in a higher stress state, and we need to extend more grace than normal. So I think that me making sure that I remind myself of that, for me, that's part of being fluid in my personal life. And when I create more space there, it helps me to have more sort of energy for my work life as well. So it's been, so for me, it's both. And then also just like, part of being fluid in my work life has been looking at sort of what's happening in the greater sort of environment, meaning with COVID and things getting canceled, and are we going into a recession, that you're taking all of these things into consideration when you're thinking about decisions you're making for your business. And so that's definitely been a place that I've been fluid as well. Understanding that what work looked like in 2019 might not be what it looks like in 2020 or 2021. And I really believe that some of those things actually are going to be amazing. Like some of the things that are going to come from that are going to be like, that was the best decision I could have made. And thank goodness for 2020, because I don't know that I would have made that decision or made that pivot without that. And it's the same thing with it's so interesting with the podcast, the Injured Athletes Club podcast that I co-host. And in the book, in Rebound, we interviewed all these different injured athletes, and independently from each other, so many of them have said, I would never wish this on anyone. And I wouldn't necessarily want to go through it again, but I'm so grateful that this injury occurred, because I came out the other side a better person, a better athlete, and moved in a direction I never would have had that not happened. So, and I really believe that that's going to happen with this as well for a lot of people, and definitely for myself.
I think that's definitely a mindset I'm gonna adopt, because I think it's usually during your challenging times that you actually find out more about yourself, and then you make decisions that if it was just the run of the day, everyday meal, you wouldn't have come out of your comfort zone. I think the saying is that growth happens outside your comfort zone.
That's right.
Really push everyone out of their comfort zone.
Yep, I always say you can't grow without growing pains, so get ready.
Serious growing pains. Sindra, did you want to touch on that question about being fluid?
Yeah, I think, being fluid is so important, and maybe I'll think about it in terms of my business. And one of the things that I've really had to do is protect my focus. I had Eric B. I was having a conversation with Eric B. and I think it was on my podcast, or it was on his, where he shared some data, and he said, if you watch 3 minutes of cable news in the morning, you're 27% more likely to say that you have had a terrible day.
Wow.
So, isn't that crazy? So I think what's important about that is, like, we do have to protect what we're focused on. And, for me, and it hasn't been easy, but it's like, okay, what is the opportunity? How can I focus on, how can I serve during this time? People need us more than ever. So it's like, what are people asking for me? Or what do they want? And so, I kind of said in my business, my executive coaching has increased. I think I just froze.
Yeah, your picture.
Yeah, you did on mine.
We can still hear you.
Okay, you can still hear me. So, my executive coaching has increased. I just got this inquiry of people who wanted to do a book club based on my books. So I thought, okay, well, what can I provide them so they can have a great book club? And how can I develop some new resources? Another high school asked me to do these videos, 5-minute videos with lesson plans that they could implement the 10 practices from my book into their classroom. So, I think the importance of that is continuing to pivot and adjust and remind ourselves that we can do that.
Okay. I love that answer. Yeah, keep pivoting and adjusting. And I loved what you just said about protecting your focus, because I found I've completely stopped watching the news. I kind of did a correlation study on myself and just found that it depressed me at the end of the day. So I've limited watching the news and watching social media. And I think by asking yourself, how can you serve, and trying to watch what impacts your mindset is going to be kind of really helpful going forward for all of us.
Absolutely.
So before I was going to ask, so the last thing I'm going to touch on is what's one thing that you'd like to share with the world to help with their mental fitness. But actually, before I go there, what has surprised you about how resilient you've been during this period, and if there's something that you've learned about yourself from this period?
Interesting question. Do you have something that pops into your mind, Sindra?
I think that I've realized that, and I already said this a little bit, but just that the importance of what we do. And it's helped me realize that and I knew this, but now I see it, that everybody
Yeah.
needs these mental skills and tools and this ability to be resilient and rebound. And that's what I've seen. And it doesn't matter what, who you are. It doesn't matter what your job is, or if you're an athlete, or what type of job you have. It's so important that all of us are protecting our focus and really being kind of standing guard to our mind. And that's what I've realized more and more. And I've had to practice it more than typical. It's like, how can I stand guard to my own mind and protect my focus, protect what I'm paying attention to, focus on the things that give me energy instead of the things that drain me. And for me, it's like a daily commitment to do that, because there's so much negativity. There's so much, so many things with that we could focus on that really drain our energy. So protect your energy, protect your focus. That's been my kind of mantra during the last couple of months.
I love that answer, because I love the answer where you said we've had to do this every day, because I think this period has been so testing, and you really had to be your work just to get through the day and manage all the uncertainty and negative feelings there. And sadly, because of the pandemic, everyone now understands the importance of mental skills, or as I call it, mental fitness. Before, when I try and tell loved ones, like I've got a nurse in my family and a doctor, they never understood what I was talking about. But now when I ask them about their mental fitness, they clearly understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So this is going to become very important going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it's interesting. There's just definitely been things, I think, similar to Sindra. There's definitely been things where all of these things intellectually, and now living in it in this particular time has sort of solidified how important those things are. So that's always interesting for me, especially when it's things that I work on with my clients, or like I've written about in my books, and then I see myself going through it. So it's sometimes, I don't know if you guys ever get asked this, but they're like, well, since you're an expert in this, that must mean you're always confident or you never struggle. And it's like, no, that's life. But we might have, because it's something that we practice, we might recognize things more quickly and have the tools to be able to deal with it. So it's, so it's really making sure that I'm using the tools that I have. And I think the biggest thing for me during this time that has sort of been surprising or really interesting in terms of resilience that I've found is really critical for me, and I think for everybody, is making sure that I'm really genuinely recognizing my efforts and changing those reward pathways. So that has looked different. So an example of that is I ended up starting a membership, and I did a founding members launch, and then just to do the initial launch and then close the membership. And I don't know where I read this. There was a specific champagne that, since I was like, I don't know, 25 or 30, that I like somehow put on this giant pedestal, that like at some point I'm going to have something amazing to celebrate, and I'm going to buy that bottle of champagne. And it wasn't even that great, or it's like a $50 bottle of champagne. But for some reason, like this became this thing in my head that like this was the ultimate sort of champagne to get, that at some point. And I didn't get it for my first book. I didn't get it for my second book. I just kept holding it in my mind as this thing. And so I started this membership, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to buy a bottle of champagne. But I didn't buy it because I got members signed up and I exceeded my goal. I bought it because I did something that pushed myself so far out of my comfort zone. And that was what I was celebrating, was the fact that I did this thing when I had no idea what it was going to look like, and got people on board. And that was so far out of my comfort zone of anything I'd ever really done in a while, pushing myself like that. And so that I bought that bottle of champagne because of that. So recognizing, and changed the reward pathway because of that, because I'm now sort of recognizing that was amazing that you pushed yourself so far out of your comfort zone, because I know how hard that was, and you have so much courage. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just making sure in all of this that we're really genuinely recognizing how hard this is right now, and how amazing we are all doing through all of this, and doing that in a very authentic and genuine way of like, you know what, because definitively people do not do this enough, like recognize how well they're doing, and the things that they've been able to do during this time, or just in general. I think people struggle with that.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll definitely raise my hand up and say I'm too busy kind of looking to the next project. And
Yeah.
it was like, okay, I need to do this now, instead of actually just sitting down and think, Jesus Christ, you did. Like what you said is like, you pushed yourself out of your comfort zone that much.
Yeah.
That definitely requires champagne. And definitely in this environment where I think we could all give ourselves a pat on the back, because just keeping afloat of water, just like kind of treading water, is you're doing amazing in this environment. So it's definitely something I'm going to start doing, is rewarding myself more instead of keep looking to the next project. Actually, just taking time to be really grateful and reward yourself, and give yourself a pat on the back. So we're coming to the end. I want to say thank you so much for giving your time. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with both of you. Just before we finish, I'd like to end the note on what's one thing you'd like to share with the world to help with their mental fitness. I don't know, Sindra.
Yeah, I'll go first. Sunny, something that's helped me right now is I read Susan David's book called Emotional Agility over this pandemic period. And in this book, she talks about, and she's a psychologist, and she talks about using our emotions as data, not as directives. So this idea that kind of checking in, noticing how you're feeling and using it as information. And that's one of the things I've been doing a lot is, okay, how am I feeling right now? What led me to this? Kind of like Carrie was saying earlier, but what's the data here, and how can I see this as data? And maybe it just means that this is like what's important to me right now, and that's why I'm feeling this way. And then just this idea of that I can act independent of how I feel. So just because maybe I'm feeling fearful and anxious or overwhelmed doesn't mean that I need to act that way. I think that's so powerful for athletes. Just because right there, maybe feeling anxious doesn't mean that they need to act anxiously. Or for corporate executives, if they're feeling overwhelmed and uncertain, that they can still act based on their values and what's important. So that's the last thing that I would, encourage people just to think about is how can you continue to act independent of how you feel. And just because you feel that way doesn't need to mean that you have to act a certain way, right? So using your emotions more as information, I think could help really everybody who's listening.
Okay. Thank you for that piece of information. Yeah, it's something I like to practice, of giving yourself space from your thoughts, so that you choose, how am I going to engage with my thoughts? And I like that one. Just because you're afraid or anxious doesn't mean you can still go outside and put yourself on the line and step out of your comfort zone, even with those fears still there. So thank you for that, Sandra.
Yes.
Carrie, did you want to?
Yeah, I feel like so many of I've already said so many of the things that I'm like that I would say, and I also it's such a great question, because I feel like I would answer differently depending on each day each hour probably that you asked me. But I think right now one of the biggest things that I would want to share with people is to just think of, one of the things that we're sort of grieving during this time is, life is different than what we used to know it as. And I think sometimes we don't recognize that as grief, or that we are grieving that. So the importance of both recognizing that, as well as making sure that we are creating things to be excited about that are happening in the future, because that's one of the things that has been sort of feels like it's been taken away. And so making sure that in some way you're creating something, and it could be something small. Like one of my clients, her thing was she goes to get in her neighborhood. Everyone's in a different place in terms of what's open and what's not, and what you're able to do and not able to do. And so we're still a lot of the counties here in California, you're not able to go inside and eat in restaurants. And so that's been missing in her life. And so for hers, her big thing is like every Thursday I go get a milkshake, and every week she has something, and she looks so forward to that thing. So even if it's something small like that, but really thinking about how can I create opportunities for me to be excited about something that's coming up, because that's something that used to be for many people a regular part of life that isn't as present as it was before the pandemic. So thinking about that, I think, is a big thing right now.
I love that answer. That's so I do this thing where I draw an emotional well, and I kind of think the inflows of your emotional well. Before, we used to get to go out with friends, go to the cinema, and those inflows are not there now. So I love your answer of planning for joy. Like literally, you have to put effort and intention into what's going to give me joy and where am I going to get it from, because otherwise your emotional well will soon start to get lower.
Yep.
So thank you so much for your time, guys. This has been an absolute pleasure, and just want to say thank you. And
thank you, Sunny.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Sunny.
Okay.
You guys are completely frozen now. Am I frozen?
No, really? So Sunny's not frozen to me. Am I frozen for you, Sunny?
No, you're not frozen. It's just Sindra that's frozen.
But Sindra, you're frozen.
Have I been frozen the whole time?
Since when you said it, when you were like, I think I'm frozen, you've been frozen.
Oh,
what a bummer.
There's nothing I can do. My whole screen is just frozen. So
weird.
I thought maybe, I was like, well, I could have exited and then entered back in, but oh well.
At least we can hear you, but
yeah.
Isn't that funny?
And the way you're frozen isn't horrible, right? Like it's not. How sometimes you're frozen.
My hand, like in my hair or something.
Your hand was just about to touch your hair, and it looks like you're saying something very important.
Right? Yeah. You do that. It does look like you're just continuing to say very important things. Oh my gosh! So funny. Oh, awesome.
Thank you, Sunny. That was really nice.
That was cool.
Thank you, guys.